He slept with his 3 sisters and wreaked havoc. Caligula was the 3rd Roman emperor, who ruled from 37 to 41. His real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, but he was nicknamed Caligula because of the little boots he wore as a child when he accompanied his father on his military campaigns. His rise to power was enthusiastically received by the Roman people, who expected him to be a just and generous ruler like his father Germanicus. However, after suffering a serious illness, Caligula radically changed his personality and became a cruel, extravagant, and megalomaniac tyrant. One of the most terrifying facets of Caligula's life is revealed in his obsession with absolute power and his disregard for human life. The emperor was also known for his extravagant and scandalous personal life, adding an element of infamy to his reign. His tumultuous relationships and sexual excesses fueled the fires of controversy. Caligula's court became a stage for chaos and depravity, where the emperor's darkest desires were carried out without restraint. His erratic and unpredictable behavior generated a climate of terror and instability in Rome, which only ended when he was assassinated by a conspiracy of the Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and the nobility. Welcome to the Diary of History. Caligula's cruelties did not distinguish between his own and strangers. The emperor was responsible for the death of his cousin Tiberius Gemellus and the head of the Praetorians Macron. According to the historian Suetonius, Caligula adopted Gemellus as his son and heir, but then falsely accused him of conspiring against him. Tiberius Gemellus was Caligula's cousin and one of the few surviving descendants of Germanicus, a beloved military leader and popular figure in the imperial family. Caligula, after becoming emperor, saw in Tiberius a potential threat to his power. In 37 AD, Tiberius Gemellus was arrested and later found dead under mysterious circumstances. Some sources suggest that he was executed by order of Caligula to eliminate any potential competition. As well, Macron was the prefect of the Praetorium who helped Caligula ascend to the throne after Tiberius' death. Macron is said to have smothered the aging emperor to ensure Caligula's succession. However, Caligula soon got rid of Macron, whom he considered a threat to his power. He offered him the position of governor of Egypt, but then ordered him to commit suicide before he reached his destination. Macron obeyed and slit his wrists along with his wife Ennia. Lucius Aelius Sejanus, known as Macron, served as head of the Praetorian Guard under the reign of Emperor Tiberius. During Caligula's absence from Rome, Macron maintained control and played an important role in the succession of power. However, when Caligula returned to the city and assumed the throne, Macron was accused of treason and conspiracy. Caligula, wishing to consolidate his authority, decided to get rid of Macron. Caligula had no scruples in eliminating possible rivals or uncomfortable allies. His reign was marked by cruelty and paranoia. One of the most known infamies associated with Caligula was his desire to be worshipped as a god and his imposition of divine worship by the Roman Senate, as well as the construction of temples in his honor. Caligula, from the beginning of his reign, demonstrated a penchant for self-deification and extravagance. However, his decision to force the Senate to worship him as a god marks a turning point in his relationship with the Roman elite. The Roman Senate, as an institution, possessed significant power in politics and decision-making in ancient Rome. Although the Senate was willing to bestow honors and titles on emperors, Caligula's demand to be explicitly deified and worshipped challenged the traditional norms and values of Roman society. Caligula insisted that his image be placed in the temples, alongside the deities venerated by the Romans. He demanded that senators worship him and that sacrifices be offered in his name. This provocative action generated unease and resistance within the Senate and among the general population, as many Romans considered it blasphemous to worship a human being as a god. The construction of temples in honor of Caligula also marked a significant departure from established customs. The building of these temples required considerable financial and human resources, which further increased the alienation and discomfort of the population towards the eccentricities of their emperor. Caligula demonstrated his tendency to defy established norms from the beginning of his reign. One of the most surprising and scandalous stories about the emperor is the one that states that he wanted to appoint his favorite horse Incitato as consul and priest, to whom he also built a marble stable and gave him a human wife, which adds an even more surprising and disturbing nuance to this story. Although it is unclear whether this ever materialized, the mere idea reflects Caligula's unbalanced mentality and his willingness to push unimaginable limits. Incitato was a racehorse that participated in the competitions of the Roman circus. Caligula had a great passion for horses and for racing, and he had a special predilection for Incitato, whom he treated with all kinds of luxury and attention. Incitato lived in a villa with gardens and 18 servants, ate oat flakes with gold, drank wine in golden cups, wore purple cloaks and necklaces of precious stones. The night before a race, Caligula would sleep beside him and order absolute silence throughout the city so that the horse would rest well. If Incitato won the race, Caligula rejoiced and made toasts in his honor. If he lost, he was furious and punished the charioteer or the rival. The most incredible thing is that Caligula wanted to elevate Incitatus to two of the most important and prestigious positions in Roman society. The consul was the supreme magistrate who ran the government and the army. The priest was in charge of performing religious rites and maintaining the favor of the gods. According to Suetonius, Caligula announced his intention to appoint Incitatus consul on several occasions, but never actually did so. According to Dion Cassius, Caligula appointed Incitatus priest of the imperial cult, which paid homage to the deified emperors. These actions caused a great scandal and strong indignation among the senators and the Roman people, who saw how a horse received more honors than they did. But the emperor did not stop there, but again stupefied everyone with his squandering of the public treasury on lavish parties, pharaonic works, and absurd projects, such as building a bridge over the sea to imitate Alexander the Great. Caligula inherited an abundant treasury from his predecessor Tiberius, who had been an austere and thrifty ruler. However, Caligula soon squandered this fortune on lavish and unnecessary spending, which far exceeded the state's income. Caligula spent more than 2.7 billion sesterces in less than 1 year. Known for his extravagant festivities, he frequently organized sumptuous banquets and shows. These events were a display of unparalleled opulence, where food, drink, music, dance, and games flowed in abundance. In his palace or gardens, thousands of people were treated to exotic and expensive delicacies, such as flamingo tongues and ostrich brains. Moreover, the gifts were not limited to food, as Caligula generously distributed jewels, clothes, slaves and animals among the attendees. On occasion, he would even rain gold coins on the crowd or serve wine mixed with dissolved pearls, displaying his extravagant display of wealth and power. The ambitious works undertaken by Caligula left an imposing mark on the Rome of his time. He directed projects of great magnitude and splendor, both in the public and private spheres. Among the most notable achievements was the expansion and embellishment of his palace on the Palatine Hill, where he immersed himself in the grandeur of his own deification with the construction of a temple in his honor. He also built an aqueduct that supplied his luxurious villa on Lake Nemi, erected a colossal bronze statue representing himself as Hercules or Jupiter, and left his mark with the creation of a monumental lighthouse in the port of Ostia. The reason why Caligula decided to build a lighthouse in Ostia is a matter of debate among historians, as there are no ancient sources that clearly explain it. However, some hypotheses can be put forward based on the historical and archaeological context. One possible hypothesis is that Caligula wanted to emulate his grandfather Augustus, who had built a lighthouse in the port of Alexandria, Egypt, inspired by the famous Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Caligula had great admiration for Augustus, and perhaps he wanted to leave his mark in Ostia with a monumental work that would serve as a guide and symbol of his power. Another possible hypothesis is that Caligula wanted to improve the safety and efficiency of maritime traffic in Ostia, which was the main port of Rome and the place where most of the supplies of grain, oil, wine, and other products arrived. Ostia had a natural harbor formed by the mouth of the Tiber River, but it was shallow and prone to silting. Caligula therefore initiated the construction of a new artificial harbor further north, which was completed by his successor Claudius. Caligula's lighthouse may have been part of this harbor enlargement and modernization project. A third possible hypothesis is that Caligula wanted to use the lighthouse as a platform for his shows and entertainments. It is known that Caligula was fond of parties, horse racing, and naval games. The lighthouse offered him a privileged view of these activities, or even served as a stage for his own performances. According to Suetonius, Caligula used to disguise himself as gods or heroes and participate in the competitions of the circus or the amphitheater. Whimsy and eccentricity also characterized the insane projects that Caligula promoted during his mandate. Among them, the famous bridge built over the sea connecting Baia and Puteoli in the Bay of Naples stands out. As Suetonius recounts, Caligula ordered the joining of 2 miles of ships to form a floating bridge, over which his army advanced in full armor. In an image that reflected his eagerness to emulate Alexander the Great, Caligula crossed the bridge mounted on a white horse, sporting a laurel wreath and gold armor. Another extravagant and senseless project was the failed invasion of Britain, where soldiers were ordered to collect shells on the beach as spoils of war, illustrating the recklessness and eccentricity of his decisions. His squandering of the public treasury caused an economic crisis and a famine in Rome, which only ended when he was assassinated by a conspiracy of the Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and the nobility. In a vague attempt to maintain his wealth, Caligula increased taxes, confiscating property and conducting sham trials to obtain personal funds is a shocking display of his ruthless pursuit of enrichment and abuse of power during his reign in the Roman Empire. Ordinary citizens, as well as members of the aristocracy, were affected by this additional financial burden, which generated discontent and unrest among the population. In addition, Caligula confiscated properties of senators and other prominent figures for his own convenience. This measure not only allowed him to accumulate wealth, but also weakened his potential political rivals and those who might oppose his rule. The appropriation of valuable property further aggravated tensions between the emperor and the Roman elite. Another sinister tactic attributed to Caligula was the organization of sham trials to condemn wealthy individuals to death and appropriate their inheritances. He is said to have used false accusations and frame-ups to justify executions and confiscation of assets. This cruel and scheming strategy allowed him to eliminate those who were perceived as a threat to his power and, at the same time, to increase his own fortune and that of the empire. On the other hand, Caligula increased taxes on trials, weddings and brothels, and organized auctions for the sale of gladiators at spectacles. He also reinterpreted the wills of Roman citizens who had left their property to Tiberius so that he would receive it. Caligula appropriated the wealth of senators who annoyed or contradicted him, and even that of some who had died or committed suicide. These actions contributed to the creation of a climate of fear and distrust in Roman society. Citizens, including senators and the aristocracy, lived under constant threat of being targeted by Caligula's ruthless ambitions. His rule was characterized by arbitrariness and cruelty, which further fueled Caligula's image as a tyrannical and ruthless ruler. In addition to all his pettiness, he maintained an incestuous relationship with his three sisters, Drusilla being the one who figured most in this tragic chapter of his reign. The historian Suetonius states that Caligula slept with his three sisters, Agrippina the younger, Drusilla and Livilla, and lent them to his friends to do the same. It also says that Caligula fell madly in love with Drusilla, and when she died of an illness, he deified her and declared her his legitimate wife. On the other hand, the historian Dion Cassius relates that Caligula had a great esteem for his sisters, and that he named them priestesses of the imperial cult, granted them honors and privileges, and included them in his coins. He also relates that Caligula mourned the death of Drusilla very much, and that he dedicated a magnificent funeral and a temple for her. Drusilla, Caligula's younger sister, was the object of an unhealthy obsession on the part of the emperor. The proclamation of Drusilla as Caligula's wife after his death only aggravated the negative perception of his rule. The idea that an emperor would conduct an incestuous relationship and then elevate that union to the status of marriage seriously challenged the traditional norms and values of Roman society. This contributed to the image of Caligula as a depraved and unbalanced governor. This incestuous relationship not only affected the perception of Caligula among the general population, but also undermined his already strained relationship with the Senate and the Roman elite. The aristocracy viewed his immoral behavior with dismay and feared that his influence in politics and decision-making was motivated by his personal inclinations rather than the welfare of the empire. However, historical sources recounting the details of Caligula's incestuous relationship with his sisters, especially Drusilla, are often sensationalized and tinged with prejudice. The image of Caligula as a cruel and depraved tyrant has been greatly influenced by these accounts and by the propaganda of his successors. Although the practice of incest is a grim and condemnable example of the erratic and morally questionable behavior for which Caligula was known, the emperor's abusive and degrading behavior toward the wives and daughters of senators is another shocking example of his depraved character. These immoral and humiliating acts shed light on his abuse of power and his disregard for the social and ethical norms of Roman society. Caligula, in his quest to satisfy his darker impulses and desires, did not hesitate to sexually abuse the wives and daughters of senators. This behavior not only grossly violated the rights and dignity of these women, but also represented a flagrant abuse of his position as emperor. Caligula slept with the wives of the most distinguished senators, and then told them the details of his sexual encounters, and even forced them to kiss his mouth after having intercourse with his wives. What further aggravates the vileness of these actions is Caligula's mocking and contemptuous attitude towards the victims' husbands and fathers. He is said to have mocked the senators for their impotence or ridiculed them for being cuckolds, a term used to describe men whose wives were unfaithful to them. This derogatory and humiliating attitude reflects his sadism and his desire to exert control and dominance over those he considered inferior. This derogatory and humiliating attitude reflects his sadism and his desire to exert control and dominance over those he considered incomer. The sexual abuse of senators' wives and daughters had a devastating impact on Roman society and the ruling elite. Senators, despite their privileged position, were powerless in the face of Caligula's capricious and tyrannical will. The emperor also enjoyed mocking and trampling on the different cultures and religions of the time. Caligula's humiliating treatment and torture of Jews and Christians are grim examples of his intolerant attitude. According to some historical sources, Caligula humiliated and tortured Jews and Christians, whom he considered enemies of Rome and his religion. Caligula ordered the installation of his statue in the Temple of Jerusalem, which was considered a blasphemy and a desecration of one of the most sacred places of Judaism. Jewish resistance to this order provoked tensions and fears of an even greater conflict. It also says that Caligula severely punished the Jews of Rome, whom he accused of disloyalty and atheism. As far as Christians were concerned, while persecution under Caligula did not reach the magnitude of those later in the Roman Empire, there are said to have been incidents of violence and oppression directed towards this emerging community. Caligula considered Christians a dangerous sect, and it is believed that some Christians suffered reprisals for their refusal to worship the Roman gods and the emperor. Recall that Caligula promoted a cult of his own person. This direct demand for divine worship clashed directly with Jewish and Christian beliefs, which rejected idolatry and worshipped one God. The reluctance to worship Caligula as a god increased the tension between these religious groups and the emperor. Caligula had no scruples about eliminating potential rivals. Caligula's regime was characterized by brutality and a willingness to eliminate any obstacle that stood in his way, even if they were close friends or allies. This tendency to assassinate or exile those who annoyed or contradicted him reveals the despotic and erratic nature of his rule. Caligula surrounded himself with a circle of friends and advisors, but even among these, few were safe from his volatile wrath. If anyone dared to express a different opinion or question his decisions, they were exposed to the most severe punishment. One of the most notorious cases was the assassination of Marcus Vinicius, an influential and close friend of Caligula. Vinicius, who had been Caligula's confidant for years, was accused of treason and executed. His sudden and violent fall illustrates how even those who enjoyed the emperor's trust were not safe from his unbridled wrath. Caligula also got rid of those who offended or irritated him by their words or actions. For example, he ordered the execution of an actor who imitated him on stage, a senator who fell asleep during a session, a knight who beat him in a chariot race, and a priest who made a mistake in pronouncing a prayer. Caligula not only killed or banished his enemies, but also humiliated and tortured them in various ways. According to Suetonius, Caligula often had his victims beaten with sticks or chains, had their eyes gouged out or their tongues cut out, made them eat the ashes of their relatives, or forced them to witness the executions of their loved ones. This policy of repression and elimination of opponents had a paralyzing effect on Roman society. The elite, including senators and officials, lived under the constant threat of reprisals if they expressed disagreement with the emperor or were considered a threat to his authority. This climate of fear and oppression contributed to a tense and volatile political environment. The practice of eliminating anyone who annoyed or contradicted him, even close friends, was one of the darkest and most destructive aspects of Caligula's reign. His cruelty and arbitrariness left a lasting mark on Roman history and contributed to the negative and fearsome image that lingers in the collective memory. Soon, Roman society became fed up with these abuses. Caligula's death was the result of a conspiracy involving senators and Praetorian guards, who wanted to end his tyranny and restore the Republic. On January 24, 41 AD, Caligula met his tragic fate. The emperor had accumulated numerous enemies due to his cruelties, so a group of Praetorian Guard officers and senators, led by Cassius Quiria, decided to put an end to his reign. On that fateful day, Caligula was at the Palatine Palace, preparing to attend a show at the theater of Pompey. It was then that the conspirators carried out their plan. In a corridor of the palace, Caligula was attacked by Cassius Quiria and his accomplices. It is said that he received multiple stab wounds and was violently murdered in an act of revenge against his oppressive rule. Caligula's death triggered a mixture of relief and fear in Rome. While many celebrated the fall of a cruel and tyrannical ruler, there was also concern that political violence and instability could worsen after his assassination. The lack of a clear succession and uncertainty over who would take the throne increased anxiety in the city. After his death, Caligula's body was transported to the imperial quarters, where it underwent a cremation process. As the fire consumed his remains, the figure of Caligula faded into history, but his legacy of cruelty, oppression, and excess would live on. Caligula's death marked a change in the course of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and left a lasting imprint on history the same way.